Okay. Chancellor, they got it dialed in.
Good. Okay.
Good.
Excellent. Welcome to the Symposium, New Visions for Regenerative Urbanism. I'm UCLA Chancellor Gene Block. As you know, the Symposium is a celebration of the exhibition which opened last night and is the fourth ARC-DR3 Forum. We're gathered virtually from various industries and disciplines, and also with more than 20 professors from 11 universities who participated in this endeavor. This is an opportunity to discuss in depth their experiences and the concepts that are on view in these 7 explorations of future risk resilient cities. Last night, which was really quite spectacular, was an overview. Today we'll have a dialogue. Experts will share their insights, and together we will reimagine what's possible for our cities and how we live, build, and thrive in relation to nature rather than in opposition. Our mission is to be proactive rather than reactive. If we can design with harmony in mind, we not only withstand disaster, we can flourish in spite of it. Today's conversations may take unexpected turns, but given the ways of nature, that is precisely what we are after. Making something new, regenerating, requires fresh perspectives and innovative thinking, which are the best gifts that universities can offer the world. And these 11 universities have done amazingly creative work. So please enjoy this event, and thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Hideo Ono, president of Tohoku University. On behalf of Tohoku University, I would like to congratulate all of you for putting together this magnificent exhibition and symposium on regenerative urbanism, living with disaster stories from 7 regenerative cities. Let me briefly explain the path of Tohoku University that led us to this exhibition and symposium. Well, Tohoku University is the 3rd oldest national university in Japan. It's located in Sendai, Miyagi, an area directly hit by the Great East Japan earthquake in March 2011. We are therefore extremely invested in the concept of resilience. Following the earthquake, we established the International Research Institute of Disaster Science, IRDIS. We positioned it as an organization that not only engages in research and education but also in social contributions through the dissemination and application of our research results. Our activities include the multi-hazard program set up in 2013 by the Association of Pacific Rim Universities, APRU, to address the threat of frequent natural disasters in the Ring of Fire. The chair of APRU is, as you just heard, Dr. Gene Block, Chancellor of UCLA. In August 2019, UCLA and Tohoku University signed an academic exchange agreement. And this was the time when Gene and I discussed launching a project which became the ARC-DR3 initiative. Started under the leadership of Professor Hiroshi Abe, UCLA X-Lab, and Professor Fumihiko Imamura, IRDIS. And to be honest, I actually had no clue at the time what was about to begin. But in retrospect, it was sort of natural because this project is a dynamic process built on the creativity of the participants from 11 universities. You will see in a moment what this project has achieved. It allows us to envision a resilient future living with disasters through the eyes of urban architectures. Well, before concluding my address, I'd like to take this opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to Mitsui Fudosan Company Limited, who generously sponsored this project, and to the many people who have worked so hard to make ARC-DR3 a great success. I hope that the ARC-DR3 network will continue to grow and become even more active. So once again, congratulations, and please enjoy lively and insightful discussion on regenerative urbanism. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I think finally I'm unmuted. So welcome to fourth ArcDL 3 Forum. And I'm Hitoshi Abe, Director of XLab at the University of California, Los Angeles, and General Coordinator of the ArcDL 3 initiative. ArcDL 3, which stands for Architecture and Urban Design for Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience, is an initiative established by XLab at the University of California, Los Angeles, in partnership with IRIDES at the Tohoku University and Miraikan, the National Museum of Emerging Science and Innovation in Japan. Inspired by Sendai Framework, ArcDL 3 is a collaborative approach to architectural education that explores visionary design possibilities for cities facing disaster. 11 universities along the Pacific Rim have participated in these initiatives, and many students and the faculty have collaborated extensively to contribute to this international research platform, even under the difficult condition of COVID-19. Actually, the COVID-19 started almost exactly the same time as we started this initiative. But today, we are very proud to share with you the opening of the exhibition, Living with Disaster, Stories from 7 Regenerative Cities, and the symposium, New Visions for Regenerative Urbanism, which presents nearly 3 years of collaboration, research, and design on the topic of regenerative urbanism and the future of potential regenerative and resilient cities. The increased intensity of cities exposed to disasters demands an urgency to establish new approaches for designing buildings, cities, and environment. City of the future, specifically cities along the Pacific Rim, are encountering more frequent and more destructive disasters that are predicted to get worse over time. Research shows that the current urban development trends, which often ignore surrounding ecosystems and cycles, continue to have a negative impact on natural environments. As a result, such conditions enhance the dangerous impacts of disasters, putting humans and human environment at higher risk to devastation. In order to cities to survive more extreme future conditions, they must consider alternative strategies for urban development, specifically strategies that are symbiotic with nature, as nature is dominant force and resilient in the way that supports and unites both human and natural ecosystem. Students' work presented here today has identified many unique conditions from their regions and has proposed a variety of urban and architectural strategies for potential future cities that lives and work with extreme reoccurring nature cycles. In this exhibition, their proposals are interwoven to form 7 visionary future cities. So now we created the small film introducing this exhibition to you. So please, let me share this image or the little video of the exhibition, Living with the Disaster, Stories from 7 Regenerative Cities. So Carlo, please hit the button to share the video.
Hi everyone, we're at Muromachi Mitsui Hall, Nihonbashi, Tokyo, at the opening reception of the exhibition Living with Disasters, Stories from 7 Regenerative Cities. Let's go take a look inside. This component, the octagon, describes the ArcDR3 initiative and details about the exhibition, and it describes the 7 wells and the 11 participating universities. This is the well of Tohoku and the Great East Japan earthquake. Here's the wall of regenerative urbanism. Now let's go take a look at the main hall.
In the main hall,
Here are the wells of 7 regenerative cities. Above us is the cloud of disasters. Inside the octagon is data and metrics from around the world.
And finally, the last component of the exhibition.
And the final component is Watasu. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to all the participants, collaborators, and supporters.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the symposium. I'm Fumihiko Imamura, the director of the IRIDES Tohoku University and other general coordinator of the ArcDR3 initiative. Today, the online symposium will discuss the concept from the study of the participant university, which are foundation for the 7 exploration for the future resilient cities. The symposium is composed of the big table and small table, whose configuration seek to flatten the relationship between the participant, presenter, and audience, and establish the environment that encourage discussions. Following the various talk, we ask you and audience to participate through the YouTube chat in the open forum to coordinate conversation and idea of the regenerative urbanism. Big table conducted in both in Japanese and English with the simultaneous translation is constructed in the traditional format. Moderated by the Hitoshi Abe, speaker Junko Edahiro, Mariana Ibanez, Machiaki Matsushima, and Eisuke Tachikawa will introduce the manifestation of the regenerative urbanism present in the different disciplinary beyond the design, urban design. Talk will be followed by the open forum where you, audience, can participate in the expanding the discourse. The small table conducted in the English only is structured to match the well in exhibition galleries. 7 discussions corresponding to the 7 regenerative cities will expand upon the idea of the regenerative urbanism and the new approaches to architecture and urban design. Moderated by Mohammed Sharif, and each city MC speakers will continue ambitions of the participant architecture studios. The work generated by the Dot studio and exhibit in the well, and how architectural exploration suggests the innovation strategy for future resilient city at the risk to disasters, and unique approach toward future regenerative urbanism. Discussion will be followed by open forum where you and the audience can participate in expanding discourse. So now, without further addition, please welcome the small table MC Mohammed Sharif. Mohammed Sharif is assistant adjunct professor in UCLA, Department of Architecture and Urban Design, and founder of the Shelf Lynch Architecture and ArcDRC publication chief editors. So time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, and greetings from Los Angeles. It's an honor to present fellow international colleagues who've been deeply associated with this initiative over the past few years during very trying times, but with incredibly stellar results. Their work individually has created a collective of 7 mythological cities that are amalgams of the research on the specific natural and human-made disaster scenarios in their specific geographic settings, but nonetheless tapping into the universal set of challenges that we face. There will be 7 discussions, and I'm going to introduce all of the participants, and then there will be 2 breaks. Each discussion will last 20 minutes, and I'm very pleased to welcome colleagues again. The first discussion on the biophilic city will be moderated by Roberto Morris from Chile, and speakers will be Jeffrey Inaba from UCLA and Shinya Okuda from Singapore. Following the biophilic city is the hydroactive city, moderated by Ulrich Kirchhoff from Hong Kong, with participants David Ma from Melbourne and Chenglun Xie from Taiwan. We will then have a short 10-minute break. Then we'll jump back to the Archipelagic city, moderated by Michael Osman of UCLA, Tsuto Sakamoto from Singapore, and Weijin Wang from Hong Kong. Following the Archipelagic city is the Pyroactive city, moderated by Elizabeth Male, with speakers Hyun Go and myself standing in for Ron Rael from UC Berkeley. Following that, Pyroactive city is the Dialogic city, moderated by Renato D'Alenton from Chile, with participants Zhu Maoyan and Luo Dian from Tsinghua, and Ishida Toshikazu from Tohoku University. And then we'll have the final break and finish with the final 2 talks, the first being on the chronosystemic city, moderated by Ken Tadashi Oshima from Washington University, with participants Daniel Abramson, also of Washington University, and Natalia Echeverri from Hong Kong. And closing the 7 cities is the Nomadic city discussion, moderated by Don Bates from Melbourne University, with fellow Melbourne faculty Leira Vioria, and from Tokyo, Toshio Otsuki. So without further ado, I will hand this over to the first of the discussions on the biophilic city.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and hello, Shinya and Jeffrey. We are just the first the first panel. I'm glad to be here. Has been an amazing experience to be working with you. As Mohammed said, we will be talking about the biophilic city. In the biophilic city, natural processes are symbiotically integrated, and the city is created as new cooperative and metabolic organization between humans, infrastructure, plants, and other interlinked life forms. These processes generate both natural and man-made vitality. Here, the city is a 4-dimensional mixture of diverse ecosystems. As you saw, The exhibition is amazing, and there are some videos. We will try to show you just briefly some images, some short parts of the video about the biophilic city. I will show you now. As I said, I will be showing just 1 minute for 3 minutes in total. Can you see it? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
共生都市。人間と動植物が共同で作る生命体。無秩序な都市の拡大が自然環境を脅かすにつれて、人間の生活圏と生物圏の間の軋轢は高まり、災害リスクは増していきます。自然生態系との均衡を保つには、人間もその循環構造の中で固有の役割を担う必要があります。この井戸で紹介するリジェネラティブ・アーバニズム、共生都市は、その生成のプロセスにおいて人間の活動と動植物のサイクルが新陳代謝を繰り返しながら有機的に結合し、都市そのものが多次元的な混合物となっていく驚くべき手法です。リフォレストシティ。沿岸地域に位置するリフォレストシティは、気温上昇の原因となる二酸化炭素の排出を止めるため、都市における新しい緑の循環を生み出しました。シティ内に林立するプランテーションタワーは、垂直に発展することで土地不足を解消し、住宅、農林業、レジャーを組み込みながら樹木のように成長していきます。タワーの成長を支えるエネルギーは、上空に浮遊するソーラー雲によって太陽光から集められます。マウンテンライオンアーバニズム。マウンテンライオンアーバニズムは、多くの野生動物が生息する山岳地帯に建設されたレジデンス施設で、生物多様性を保護しながら、この地域で頻発する山火事に対応しています。レジデンスの開発は、野生動物の生態に配慮して行われました。食物連鎖の頂点であるマウンテンライオンの移動ルートを調査すると、森に敷かれていた人間のミツバチコモンズ。生物多様性の保全には、昆虫などの小さな生物の生態にも注意を向ける必要があります。中でもミツバチの受粉行動は、人間の食料生産に影響を与えることが知られており、自然界との均衡に大きな役割を担っています。また、蜂蜜の味、粘度、季節ごとの生産量などの識別と分析は、自然環境の実態把握と変化の予測に有効です。ミツバチコモンズは、ミツバチの生息環境を模倣し、人間とこの小さな生物の二重社会を形成。
Yes, I hope you can see just to have an idea of the video, the three different projects. I would like to ask you to start with Jeffrey about your experience and how you can connect your work with the other projects in a more holistic way.
Yeah, so the mountain lion urbanism is related to the biophilic city in that our thought was that if we can make this animal who clearly needs way more space to survive than it currently does within the boundaries of the city of LA, that we could produce a biodiverse environment that would be good for all animals. So the mountain lion was an index of the sustainability of wildlife in Los Angeles. So Los Angeles is one of 2 megacities in the world that have mountain lions living within its city limits. And so we found this to be extraordinary, that in a city, megalopolis of 9 million people, that there could not only be mountain lions, but mountain lions could thrive. Unfortunately, they live in the wildland-urban interface and are subject to the perils of fire. And so our idea was, if we could create migration paths for mountain lions within greater Los Angeles, that these migration paths could be paths that could encourage biodiversity when after a fire, because those paths could be used for migration, return of species to areas that were burnt by fire, and to rebuild those areas through wildlife. So that was the goal of it, and it's been great to see that there have been some initiatives by the county and by other entities to try to actually do migration paths for wildlife in the greater infrastructure of Los Angeles.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Shinya, your words?
All right. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you, Robert. And maybe can I just say thank you to the organizers, the Abe-san Exhibition Symposiums, sponsors, and fellow participating universities, as well as the students who are incredibly intelligent and hardworking. It has been very enriching experience to participate this event. Thank you very much. So yeah, I had a chance to kind of overlook this video just Robert presented early. Then I found both the commonality and the differences among those 3 proposals. So the firstly, apparently that all proposals are exploring the symbiotic relationships between the nature and urbanism, but in the different focuses. So I understand from the video that Jeffrey's, the groups, the mountain lion schemes, is more focusing on the coexistence with the wildlife. And Prof. Ishida's scheme is more on the ecosystem and the biodiversities. And our reforest city is more on actually focusing on the carbon emissions and material life cycle. So each scheme is a sort of very different focused scenario on how the biophilic city could be envisioned and designed. So it's very interesting to see through all these three schemes. And the secondary, all schemes are proposing boundary design, innovative boundary design between the nature and urbanism, but in different relationships. How each group see the relationships between nature and urbanism seems to be very different too. So what I observe, so mountain lion scheme is trying to resolve the conflict with wildlife by time shifting, but the space sharing, if I'm not wrong. Jeffrey maybe correct me. The honeybee scheme that the Prof. Ishida leading is more like a blending a honeybee network into human habitat in an almost seamless way, but that can be only possible in a large scale of land. It's impossible in Singapore. And while our reforest city is trying to integrate in nature into high density urbanism, but apparently result is very 3-dimensional. So namely, it's a visually connected, but physically we need to segregate from urbanism to the wildlife or spontaneous natures. So the boundary design between nature and urbanism, perhaps that area is very interesting to explore further. So my last observation is there is maybe fundamental differences in scales and the density of the each city context in relationships with the surrounding environment. For instance, the Sendai or the LA that seems to be surrounded by the vast amount of the natures, which is very different from the Singapore in a little tiny island. So that's kind of creating a different perception toward the natures. Maybe for Sendai and LA, nature never be in the object to be controlled, but maybe more cope with. But for us, in order to integrate the nature, we must highly control the nature as a part of urban systems. But we also observe the highly built up urbanism like Singapore is also not so resilient for any changes or the disaster attacks. So that's how our reformed city tried to integrate the resilience of spontaneous nature into high density urbanism. But that's kind of require a lot of explorations. Maybe I stop with here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nisha and Shinya. I think I was imagining if we can mix the three projects. I think it's even they're very different, it's possible to see that maybe we could think in this as a kind of coexistence between the different approaches. I like to start thinking in the honeybees because it's something so important, but we cannot see it every day. It's something that could be hidden, but at the same time we need it. And I think that is subtle, but at the same time they can be part of these other approaches that of your projects. And I think is in one of the things that I would like to ask you both is about how you approach the form of the project, because in both cases it's like thinking in the future, but they are different in talking about the scale, how magnificent is the mountain lions projects is like creating a natural built is like a built natural environment, and how was your discussions about that? Because how you can think in the future in a natural way, how you can really build with natural elements. Jeffrey?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Roberto, for this discussion. I mean, first of all, I would say that urbanism is relevant now, maybe more than it has been in several decades, because it's only through urbanism that we're able to address large-scale problems. Urbanism is the discipline that can work at scale to respond to climate change, to respond to disasters. And so in that way, I think it's a really important discipline, and that and why the conference is so timely. For us, the Mountain Lion Project was meant to be really large in scale for two reasons. One is that there are foundations that are trying to address large-scale problems. So like in Los Angeles, there is the Getty Center, there's the Bruin Institute. Historically, there was the Griffith Observatory, which all of these are philanthropic entities that are meant to address some kind of civic concern. And our thought was, could there be a philanthropic foundation that could address climate change risks like wildfire as a way to have that be part of the civic discussion of LA. And it wasn't necessarily that something of the scale would be realized, but what we want to do was present something that was of that scale so that the larger public could understand the magnitude with which climate change problems have to be addressed. So in that way, it was intended to be polemical. I mean, just as I would see the project for the really, really beautiful solar lanterns to be ones where it's more about understanding the scale of the challenges than it is to think about the plausibility of it as a realized project.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I really loved your response. I was thinking in the scale of the project as a scale of our worries. I think it's very beautiful explained. Thank you, Shinya.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I would call this as a research-based design studios, and first half of the 4 months, the studios was kind of we collecting and analyzing the vast amount of the data, especially for the carbon emissions and how nature system and urban system works. So the result is kind of full of big data and numbers, and our student or architecture student who can only think maybe visually and three-dimensionally. So what we did, the transition between the result of the research to the spatial interpretations is we developed a series of 3D diagrams, converting a number to the volume. And that is kind of fast, the steps. And it's always difficult, I think, for any architects to transition from the research to the design. That our case is we experimented to use the 3D diagrams. Then result is kind of impossibleness to fit the nature and the urbanism in such a confined tiny island. Then result automatically become a three-dimensional way. That's what we observe. But maybe one last word for me is that we never think that our design is very optimal. It's just maybe one of the possible solutions. But the process we discussed kind of forced us to think very interdisciplinary way with the architecture and landscape and urbanism. It was kind of very fruitful, the process. So for that, I think we really had a very good enriching experiences.
Thank you, Sheena. I like when you said that the project is something you can start. You're thinking in the regeneration is a process, and is something that you can start with some component elements, but the design would be changing in the future, adapting, and I think thinking in Singapore how tiny actually is the land. I was really thinking in your project in how you are building in the air, or thinking the air as another way to use the whole space, you know, the whole dimensions. I'm not sure. I think we are just out of time. I don't know, Mohammed.
You have 10 more minutes.
Oh, great. I have another question for you. You think in the future how this network would continue working, because it has been an amazing opportunity to work in our teams, but at the same time to be watching with the other projects. And I think this exhibition is amazing because you can see how now we have a new thing. This new imaginary cities is a new thing. It's a new step in the process. How do you imagine the future of our group and thinking in the more integration between teaching, research? What do you think, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you so much, ArcTR3, for the organization of this knowledge exchange. And maybe in a way, the pandemic was very fortunate for us because we were able to have a number of discussions across geography with a higher degree of frequency than we would have had otherwise. I mean, I have to say that because of the magnitude of the challenges, that the experiences that all of the professors and schools have had that are specific to their regions have been absolutely invaluable to learnings that might be specific to one's own region. Just as a minor example, the idea that the vast percentage of first responders are not professionals, but are neighbors, was one of those insights into the social network benefits during disaster response that I don't think we would have understood in a tangible way unless it came from the discussions from our network, as it were. So I would just, say that in the future, the idea of collecting local information, sharing it within the possibilities of this communication platform will be really important if we're going to be able to address climate responses in a realizable, viable way. So I hope that is something that would continue to a very great degree.
Thank you. Shinya?
Yes, certainly it's been a very overwhelming experiences. It's not that easy to design the nature and the city together. So it's a vast amount of the questions generated, and maybe only the few has been answered. So it was a very good initiation that I also thank to this ArcTR3 initiative. Actually led us a lot of questions to be resolved. So perhaps that this collaboration may need to continue, and but it's worthwhile. I think it's really eye-opening for us to think outside of our usual disciplinary boxes, which is architecture. But that this project really forces us to think in multidisciplinary ways. It is really eye-opening experiences.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, Roberto, just add on to what Shinya was saying, and as a part of the discussion, I think being able to see the magnitude of issues in specific regions is really alarming. Like if when one experiences disasters in their own region, I think there's a tendency to think, okay, this is really serious, but to understand that it's serious all over creates a mandate for urban design that there just wasn't in the last 2 decades. On top of that, so on one hand, we're, as urban designers, dealing with disaster response. On the other hand, I feel that urban designers also have this new challenge in shaping cities that we didn't have before. That if at certain points, policymakers, legislators were instrumental in shaping cities, that as cities compete for white-collar talent, that the quality of life of cities becomes vitally important to the competition to get knowledge workers. And so urban designers are really essential in creating quality of life designs that will serve the private sector and shape cities. So in that way, we have a role in shaping cities that maybe we haven't had in recent decades as well. And the fact that those two things are combined, that both we're placed with the responsibility of responding to climate change and to make cities more livable, is this like wonderful challenge of dual use urbanism that is a great opportunity to take advantage of. But I think we could only do productive work in that way if we have a network of this sort to exchange just what are the discoveries that are happening in cities around the world.
Yes, I agree. I think is one of the things, I think is one of the beautiful things of the network is when you are talking in the world of architects, is especially in Latin America, you are thinking in design, you are thinking in a drawing. But when you are discussing here in a more multidisciplinary perspective, the design is a way of thinking, and how we need to rethink in a more collective way that design, you know, and I think it's maybe so obvious for a lot of people, but it's very easy to go straight to the drawing, and especially for architects because it's our area. But for these kind of challenges, is another scale. You say that, and when I was asking you about the future of the network, I was thinking and how, because normally when you are in your project, maybe you can have 1 semester, 2 semesters working the same thing, but later you need to change and to be updated. But what happens if in the next year our students continue your work, Jeffrey, or your Chinya work in a different step and a different direction maybe? But what happens if we start from the current project? You know, and it's because it's one of the things is to really think, to be aware how as a planet we are living very similar conditions, even if we live in very different territories. And Chile in Santiago is becoming an 8 million people without water. It's a big thing, but it's still hidden. You know, we know about that, but we cannot see it. It's like that is something that I like of bees. The pollination is how we can put things and we spread it, and how we can take advantage of that. I think that is one of the good things of this the potential futures of our network. I don't know, Virginia, do you want to say something more? Or Mohammed is coming for us.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Mohammed.
We will again thank you so much. We're going to move on to the next panel, the hydroactive city.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are gonna start now, right?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So yeah, welcome to the hydroactive city discussion with my colleagues from Taiwan and Australia. I would like to share the screen first. Can you see that? Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so what we're going to discuss today, so I'm here with David Ma from Melbourne University and Chenglong Xuan from Cheng Kung University of Taiwan. My name is Ulrich Kirchhoff from the University of Hong Kong. We are looking at the hydroactive city. Basically, it's a place where we're trying to deal with issues of rainwater as well as seawater if we're close to it, and try to redefine the relationship between the city and the architecture and the natural forces of water. So making more use of it, trying to absorb it and redistribute those resources into a concept of urban and architectural planning. So what we want to do today is actually we want to initiate a bit of a discussion, and we're quite happy in this panel because we have actually 3 different scales of application of how to deal with water. So the Taiwan University under Professor Chen Leng was looking at a regional question on the countryside in Chichu. David Ma in Melbourne was looking more at an urban scale. So was also the Singapore project we're supposed to discuss.
And the interesting thing is we in Hong Kong, we're looking more at an architectural scale. So we have really a wide range of scopes and scales to really look at how can water now be made active in those different scales, and what would it mean in terms of design strategies, and actually also the visualization of those. So what we want to discuss in our panel a bit is now the research questions that we are actually sharing across those different scales and across those different scopes, as well as what are those learning outcomes and potential future strategies on how to deal with such topics. And one thing which was also quite interesting, seeing from all our results in these different studios, is that what was the balance between preventive measures and mitigation measures when we looked at those scenarios. So was there a transition between both, or was one coming before the other? And the fourth question we would like to discuss also is, are there actually very specific design methods and tools required for the scale we were dealing with? So for that purpose, I would like basically each of the panel speakers to for a few minutes to introduce basically their individual studio. We have here some slides which we will show, and then we have a bit of discussion on those 4 points across the board. Thank you. So Chen Lung, maybe if you could talk about your studio. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Very good. Thank
Okay.
you.
So as our site is chosen on the countryside of the Tainan city, but it is actually the origin of our kind of the first settlement of Taiwan. So by looking at this countryside, we are actually looking at try to find the embodied resilience, the knowledge of the embodied resilience, like in this kind of landscape area, and in hope that we learn something from this kind of countryside, and then they can respond to the resilient issues in the urban area as well. So our issues focus more on the coastline and the storm surge issue that during the storm season or in the typhoon season, and cause a lot of flooding issues and destroy the many aquaculture and industrial settlements. And so in hope that if we look at those issues, by looking at the current and kind of conventional aquaculture industry, and then we can try to come up with the better adaptive issues. And so we are proposing the kind of new network system that in the area to link the kind of industrial processing or the landscape processing, you know, ecological landscape processing, and try to link those systems and with the consumption or tourism and the educational programs all together to form a new kind of new future of this countryside, of the coastline countryside. And the current strategy of the government are kind of the preventative strategy. They are just building the very solid dikes and to prevent the water coming in, but rather than the mitigation strategies. So the higher the dike they build, make it more difficult to drain after the typhoon and the excessive seawater flows inland. Therefore, our strategy is to change the form of settlements. It's not about the overprotecting the industry or the settlement, but it's on the coastline, on the premise that storm tides must occur. Our team regard it as an opportunity to integrate the ecological system and the human social activities. So the design strategies of, we make it 3 stages, 3 phases to respond to the kind of 3 level of ecology, industry, and social activities. And through this phasing and reorganization, rezoning the coastline area, and each phase makes a kind of preparation for the next stage in advance to mitigate the future disasters caused by the storm surge or the typhoon and the flooding. Therefore, the design focus is to rethink the trade-off between the man-made dike, between the man-made dike and the industrial aquaculture and the settlement and the ecology, the nature, this between them. And so the first stage, we just kind of getting rid of the man-made dikes. So if in the section, you can see gradually the man-made defense line will move toward inland, but this the more ecological nature way to cope with the storm surge or the typhoon and the flooding, and it also build up the more ecological way to mitigate the future storm surge. And the second stage will focus more on the aquaculture and the industrial. And at the last stage, we kind of try to weave the settlement inland and combine all the tourist activities or the educational program together. So basically the design at the countryside is to look for the embodied resilient knowledge first, and then try to give back the nature that used to belong to the nature anyway. But in a more productive way and more regenerative way, and so the natural industry and settlement can coexist better together in the future.
Great.
That's all.
Thank you very much. So David, I will share the slides for you.
Great, thank you very much.
Yes, so
Right,
maybe
so-
you introduce your strategy, your approach quickly.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah.
So at the Melbourne School of Design at University of Melbourne, we've been following the ArcDR3 research emphasis over a number of studios. And one of the areas, the main core areas of exploration has been in a major post-industrial site close to the central business district, which poses a number of different problems. One of them is that it's within a floodplain, and it's also being pegged for major redevelopment, what is actually under major redevelopment now. So approaching this this larger problem at a larger kind of scale of thinking, there was a kind of clear understanding that urbanism or urbanization needed to be approached with this idea that there needed to be interdisciplinary. So there needed to be a very clear exchange of concepts, lenses, and techniques and approaches between urban design and landscape and architectural. Then these what are considered separate disciplines needed to be kind of have an intricate relationship with each other. So in this case, urban form and urban organization needed to be acknowledging both landscape and urban design and architectural concerns, as a part of the consideration of the framework. So that also meant jettisoning a little bit the primarily economic imperatives for urban design, and also thinking about how larger ecological and environmental and landscape concerns, particularly related to the hydrosphere, will take precedence in defining the kind of larger urban organization. So at that scale, that's established that scale at the following with the following slide. Next slide. At the kind of smaller scales of urban design and landscape, an architecture where it's more tangible scales. It also needed to take on a kind of difference in thinking where urban spaces needed to be acknowledged as things that had temporal differentiation, meaning that they would actually take on very different qualities depending on circumstances. And this site is also quite complicated because the kind of flooding risks or water-related risks are multiple. So in flooding, there's coastal, riverine, and also flash flooding risks. So that we have a kind of triple risks in that sense. And then there's also the other, in being in Australia, the kind of major risks of drought. So really these landscapes needed to be able to understand that there's many different scenarios operating there. It needed to be performative. So one of the things that we also found is, besides dealing with the hydrosphere, particularly with this site, this post-industrial site, the pedosphere, so the soil and the ground became a very kind of important consideration. So not just the forming of the surface, but also what happens underneath that surface became very crucial. And then the whole idea that hydroactive landscapes become the new public commons, which, in Australia, there's been, from the First Nations history right through to, more recent history, there's been always been some degree of, public celebration of the hydrosphere as part of the public realm, but trying to think about how, addressing these problems could actually bring us new kinds of public spaces as well.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Yeah, I wanted to actually we're unfortunately having 7 more minutes left, so I want to go quickly, maybe jump to the Hong Kong part, because I think in terms of the scale, then we can have a bit of discussion on that. It's interesting to see in David's last page also that we had suddenly the section coming in, and for us in Hong Kong, since we're dealing in this high density, more architectural context, for us, it was quite important to see, okay, what are the design methods that we can employ to bring environmental analysis, environmental understanding back into the design strategy of buildings and their surrounding. So what we basically did then very early on is basically work a lot with analytical tools, like there were students that do active water analysis with actual water models to really see how does rain flow, how does flooding engage into urban and built environments, and try to get a really live understanding of how those forces really impact our immediate surrounding. And it became quite evident that at that stage also the section became a strong driver as a design medium. Because we realized, since buildings are tall, it's not really about mapping and on the ground. And I think this is an interesting point now in these 3 different studios, that we are looking at actually very different scales and very different tools to use to design with water. And I think the last one with David was interesting. The moment he goes to the more intimate scale, suddenly the section becomes really a big driver of the design method. And so in our studio, then basically everything was driven through the section itself. So everything was becoming more related. How does a building hit the ground? How does the water mitigate through the surfaces? And I think that was somehow quite interesting for us also to see that we moved away from actually the multi-tooling approach to something very specific, dealing with sections in our project. So what I would like to, since we have only 5 more minutes left, I would like to maybe ask the question to David and Cheng Lu now. What are actually then, what were your actual learning outcomes for those studios, and what probably could be your future strategies when you deal with similar issues again?
Okay, I'll jump in first then. So certainly, I think one of the, first of all, thank you very much to the ArcDR3 for actually giving us this opportunity. It was kind of a prompt as well to kind of dedicate considerable thought and effort into these issues. But certainly, starting off in the studios, because we had run a number of studios under this larger umbrella, so we were able to iterate on these discoveries from one iteration of the studio could actually feed back into the other subsequent iterations. The really good thing that we found is that it started off pretty bracketed in the sense that we were very clear that there were a number of concerns about how to deal with water within urban form. And initially there was a kind of preconception that would be about urban form, primarily urban form and organization and things like that. But then very quickly we found that moved into thinking about the larger metabolisms of the city, and that would actually, it moved away from simply focusing on how urban form would actually accept water, but also how it deals with all the other metabolisms which are very intricately tied to the hydrosphere. So food production, all these other things. It opened up the question of the pedosphere, because the hydrology and the kind of soil becomes a very important consideration as well. So that I think it kind of very quickly expanded the focus. So then we kind of almost gave up on the idea of having a very focused, everybody doing one thing. It became a kind of a wide search, I think, which, I think as a consequence of that, after the post the 3, it's given us a lot of possible lines of investigation.
Great, thank you.
Yes, I agree with David, and because although we are looking at our side is looking at the countryside, it seems there's no density. The density is really low, and there's very little settlements, but we can still find maybe the most advanced technology is kind of start going into this countryside. For example, in our case, it's a solar farm. Like everywhere now is in the countryside, and a lot of some data center is also start going into the countryside. So as we are using mostly the landscape strategies, but those architecture or the more kind of architecture or urban design strategies are really kind of integrating, should be integrating in our project as well. But because of the time frame, I think from the other universities project, I even through just a simple section drawings, I think I can learn a lot and try to kind of compare between projects and find many interesting details that they can kind of have dialogue between projects. I found it's very helpful for us as well.
Yeah, thank you. No, what I see, what is very fascinating actually about both of your studios is how you embrace the question of complexity, basically through multi-scalar approach also, right? So you're looking basically at the urban as well as the small scale nearly of the room. You're looking at the dynamics, the dynamics of the environment, but you're also looking at planning issues of how to mitigate and prevent those things. And I would like actually to know how did you Mohammed, I think we have to break, right? I see when you come up always.
No, ask your question and then we'll break.
Right. Okay. So I just would like to know, how did you actually did you engage for this complexity also? Did you engage also external experts from the other field? Was it the multidisciplinary approach, or how did you basically navigate this really vast field of complexity we're dealing with?
I would jump in. So for our university, we have the ocean engineering departments, and they have a really big factories, the laboratories, they're testing the coastline. So we really got the help from them, and also we have other professors. They are focusing more on the environmental, even in the suburban area, environmental, architecture, technology, and so on. And So we kind of try to collect as many help as possible, and I think it's really helped.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Melbourne, we did have a lot of guests coming through, either you know, in sort of semi looking at the work and giving feedback through reviews, but at the same time also giving presentations. So from governance right through to you know hydrological experts and engineers and all of these sorts of ecologists came in. So there was a kind of a multidisciplinary discussion that was kind of offered to the students, and they had to kind of navigate all of these different considerations. Yeah, that was also a semester's worth of struggle anyway.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry for overrunning by a little bit, Mohammed. I hope we didn't.
Not at all. Thank you. Thank you so much, gentlemen. That was a pleasure. So we're going to be taking a 10-minute break now, and then we'll rejoin with the Archipelagic city.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
It's hot as hell here.
It's very hot, among other things.
Yeah.
Well, I am presuming that we're going to go live, and that we are now in the second of 3 segments, which is going to be kicked off with a conversation around the archipelagic city, moderated by my UCLA colleague, Michael Osmond.
Hi, good to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in the conversation about a topic I'm very curious to learn more about this evening. So I'm here with Tsuto Sakamoto and Wei-Jin Wang, and they've been working on this archipelagic city for a number of, I suppose, weeks, months, and have come to their conclusions. And if you had a chance to watch the video, you'll see what they've been up to a little bit. I was struck just by the very concept of an archipelago, of a city which is already kind of an archipelago, where everybody is in some way always already in a bubble, is going to become even more archipelagic, that things are going to become more disconnected. I was even surprised that fire on the one hand and flooding on the other hand were both going to have a similar effect on the future of cities, and differently described through different forms of design. But the idea that somehow the city would have to become, as we learned, federated, that there would be a kind of isolation zones where moving between one and the other would become more complex. I saw this very much as an interesting response, partly obviously out of necessity to the consequences of climate change and rising seas and wildfires. But I also see it interestingly at a cultural level, not just as a kind of technical response to these realities of climate change, but also as a kind of cultural response. And by this I mean, if you think about the modernist city as a place where things were meant to become ever more the same, and different parts of the planet were meant to become ever more similar to one another, where you could navigate, say, a city like Tokyo or a city like Hong Kong or a city like New York or a city like Los Angeles, and be able to manage the differences between them through a kind of modernist logic of, say, the grid or the highway or the transport system. What's really interesting about the archipelagic city, seems to me, as a response to modernism, is that it's not a design of making things more similar. It's not a design of making things more comprehensible necessarily, but rather, and the designer is no longer about comprehension and compromise, but actually, interestingly, about creating difference and differentiation and fundamentally, in a certain way, breaking our assumptions that cities are organisms. They become actually a kind of body without organs, if you will. So I think this is a fascinating topic, and I'm super curious to see the presentations that that Tsuto and Wei-Jin have prepared for us this evening, and then we'll have a conversation after they present. Tsuto, why don't you go first?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Can I share screen now?
I think you can, yes.
Yes, okay. Okay, let me start now to talk about the sea level rise, East Coast region, Singapore. Okay, let me see. Okay, the Singapore, an island state located in a tropical belt, has been affected by torrential rains and floods since even before its modernization. The recent and in the future climate change will, and the sea level rising will definitely affect the state in a more significant manner. Taking up the East Coast region of Singapore, the lowest lying area of the state as a case, our studio project pursued a series of questions. Firstly, to live with the sea level rising, how do we accommodate such a phenomenon in a sustainable way? The question was pursued through the production of a master plan for the region. Okay. The master plan is a transformation of an existing land to the series of mounds and basins by employing a method of a cut and fill over an extended period of time. Taking into consideration the place of a land subsidence and the pattern of existing drainage, the cut and fill are locally executed without disturbing a major infrastructure significantly. By 2065, the major road starts to be buried deep underground, while by 75, the surface is dedicated to water transport, smaller vehicles and bridges. And by 85, we will see the flux of water to the area. And then the nature will take its course to erode the edge of mounds and basins. By 2100, the mounds and basins would have morphed into something distinctly different from now, which we would call Archipelagic city. Second question was how such phenomena will transform our life, culture, and foremost, the sensibility and the mindset. Based on this long-term man-made, calm, self-morphing master plan, the question was pursued through various architectural designs built on top of it. Under the series of a transformation of an urban scape, how do people maintain the sense of memory? The project Palaces for the People is conceived as a resilient storage facilities that provides individuals a space to store their items during their evacuation due to the cut and fill construction and the extreme weather. Guarded by two retaining walls safely, the space also allows people to revisit, to enjoy their items and to meet their neighbors, while after the construction, it will continuously work as a communal space buried under mounds newly constructed. In pursuit of a new living, what opportunities can arise and how it can shape the living sphere? The project Living Water proposes a self-retaining and self-enclosed lifestyle. Built on a marshland, the facility encourages people to fish and farm using surrounding natural setting, while the raised floors above allows them to conduct their office works. In pursuit of a resilient mindset, how does the culture of disaster resilience and adaptiveness grows? Assuming that the disaster would never end, the project, The Water is Back, proposed a design for the situation when the mounds are flooded. The balloons as a warning system, the wave mill as a soil sedimentation accelerator, and the lightning rod as an electric charger turns to be a catalyst for the people to develop a communal culture. At the same time, allowing natural force to heal the damaged landscape. To summarize, the project attempts to challenge the sort of a social complacency by causing a series of minor devastations that are manageable, yet constantly alerting the people of the rising water. Facing and engaging with such reality, the project sought for creative ideas for architecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we'll be hearing from Regen.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, let me. Yeah, let me see. Oh, how? Sorry, I'll tell you. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Can you see my image? Yeah. All right, great. I like to foreground the projects in a way that we actually archipelagical city comes framing more recently, and we started with the idea or respond to the collective concern about regenerative urbanism and resilience. And the idea of adapted tower come from the realistic urban condition of Hong Kong, high density, and also the way that density respond to land use, and develop this for many decades, develop this autonomous kind of housing typology, podium tower, very much in other cities in Asia as well. So this, the whole studio is to rethink what new typology that we can develop in response to the changing condition that is climate change, sea level rising, and all this high density housing are developed currently along the lowlands, which is make it very vulnerable to the climate change. And so the students are to look at 6 sites. Each is a section cutting across north and south side of Victoria Harbour, that it has the condition, and it is exactly the urban condition of Hong Kong, which is the long strips of urbanism, tower typology developed along the coast, and where you have backdrop of mountain and all the way down to the harbor, to the river. So each group of students are there looking at the condition of this cluster of urbanism from mountain to water, in terms of sun, in terms of wind, in terms of the ground. So what I'm going to present here is the studio is a pedagogy, it's a studio method as well as the output. So all students are examined the existing ground condition, rocks, soils, foundations, and also habitats that they have already stopped, or are we able to restore? Of course, we look at the water, not only seawater rising, but and how they shape the coastal condition, and the urbanism, how urbanism had changed that in the last few decades, and also how water from the mountain top running down. So the tidal up and water coming down are the condition of our concern. And many studies shows that how infrastructure, roads and towers had changed the condition. And also small exercise start to generate for how we can change that in order to restore water or provide porous condition for the water to come back and restore the habitation. Students are looking at the wind, and it's very clear how the tower has changed the performance of the wind, but also and also at the housing unit level, that for proposals, how can we make the tower more porous in a way that we change the wind dynamics so it got cross ventilation as much as possible. And that also to do with the ecology. Not only we study how the coastal condition and what habitats are there, and also the trees, the bushes along the hill, and how water we had just talked about can change that, facilitate ecology and biodiversity. And of course, we have to look at structure as a tower. That what other options do we have to make performative structure that allow able to facilitate the ecology, the communal life, and the wind and water and so on, as a different skeleton structure or transfer plate, or how the foundation can be dispersed differently to the ground. And of course, we study the current typology, the super efficient that have been adopted by the government and developer for years, but also look for new typology with the new performance of structure and the distribution of programs out there. Now, finally, all this has to be communal, and that is to do with the idea of bubble, or the idea of separation or enclave. That tower itself is it's an architecture object, but how tower and towers are related together into an internet condition at the ground level for seawater, for habitats, but also at the tower level, at the rooftop level, from when the water were collected and coming down at the communal level, at the housing level, and out all the way down to the ground. So different examples of the students' projects, such as this one, that sort of assumption of redevelopment from the current condition that they have studied, to come up with a different performative tower, adaptive tower, that also work together, in this case, the three, on the existing site condition, with the reformation of the site, allowed water to coming down, collect, and seawater to coming up, and towers on top, be able to have communal spaces, cross ventilation for units and for communal spaces. So the overall performance of that cluster of towers, regenerative, as a way of regenerative urbanism. Very quickly, other examples re-examines the other side, how the tower and the infrastructure has changed the performance of the water and how much water has been wasted in that. So this group of students focus on collecting water, that each tower become a small kind of foundation, become a small dam, the podium, that and also from the roof. And the tower itself, the unit and the transfer plate in between. The transfer plate, structural transfer plate, become possibilities of collecting water, and also communal gardens and porous ecology developed. So this is another example in Lehman, where students focus on collecting water, and the collecting water become also water recycling system, sort of a midpoint water recycling system, and all the way down to the ground where the tidal comes up. And so these are pretty much, and the very last images of that is to show that the existing site condition that been cut off by infrastructure and retaining wall, and how the tower can work together, again, individual tower, but work together as a cluster, and it become the facilitate to bring the water and change the retaining wall condition to allow continuity from mountain to the ocean. So all these different approaches at different site conclude in a way, or sum up in a way that through handling water, through handling ventilation, wind, and through creating this eco hubs in the tower to make it more porous and also more collective, is our response to the issues of regenerative urbanism, adaptive tower. But at the same time, I think what makes me exciting today is to also look at it from a new angle, which is archipelagic, how they work together, or how are they separate. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Really inspiring work, really brilliant students doing amazing thinking and actually bringing it to a level of technical specificity that almost makes it not just realizable, but probable. So that is a brilliant evidence. I don't know how much more time, Mohammed, do we have for?
You have a good couple of minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes. So I guess one question I was interested in is the problem of continuity. So both of you were very interested in creating continuities between the past, the present, and the future. If I may, Wei-Jin, it seemed as though the tower actually represents a kind of typological continuity with Hong Kong, and therefore the tower needs to adapt. And Tsuto, yours seems more like a kind of continuity of memory, that the sort of identity of the cities of the city that you're looking at, of Singapore in the future, like it has to have its own memory continuity. I'm curious about how resilience and the question of continuity were part of your pedagogy, both of you.
Yeah. Okay. Let me start now. Yeah. It's interesting, to talk about the continuity from a point of view, the Michael actually, in the beginning actually introduced us, this idea of a sort of, the response to a modernism. in a sense, modernism tried to, to control the nature, and then I try to control, that's why, they come with a certain grid and so on, and then kind of erasing, the continuity of a memory and so on. And then in case of, the typology, the tower, it's actually, the more unified, the podium with the tower, that was, there's a kind of a typology, they designated due to the economy and the capitalist, strategy. However, as a response to it, I think the Hong Kong's case, when I look at the typology of the tower, right, the foot of a tower is very, very interesting in the sense that it allows the water to pass through. At the same time, they kind of retains and then use it for the recycling and so on. So in a sense, the nature is participated in it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And in our case, we allowed, the water to come into the city, which is quite bold. And then maybe, there are some objections to it, But at the same time, it kind of, allows people to be alerted and then very sensible, quite, against, this idea of a social complacency. So I think that is a kind of suggesting a new way of the urbanism in a sense that the nature, whether we like or not, whether it's ideal for the people or not, there is participating in.
Yes, continuity. I think first of all, I am amazed to see my friend Chuto's their studio that in a way seems to, at the one hand, super aggressive in a way to regenerate the city and become a kind of a Venice in Singapore. But at the same time, I'm also see how actually on the other side, it's actually based on the existing building, alteration of the existing building and memory and so on. So the two poles that kind of work together in this very aggressive, progressive ideas, which is very, very inspiring. And the differences there between the two cities, they were very similar in many ways. But we are dealing with the edge condition. Only I could even say passively the edge condition, the 5 meters zone to be resilient for the sea level changes. And while the Singapore is allowing the water to coming into the city, right? So that's the differences. But speaking of continuity, I think we also very, very proud of that we take grant, or we are not challenging the property ownership, the land division and all that, and also the tower itself as an entity. But there are various ways to keep that continuity, either through renovate the existing tower, the strategy can still be applied, or redevelopment, or from new development lands with a similar development pattern and land pattern. I think the strategies that we have developed are try to be able to hopefully in the future adaptable for all these different conditions. That's my response. Yeah.
Fantastic. I was just thinking, the original theory of the archipelagic city, as far as I remember, is from the city of the captive globe. And it reminded me immediately of the archipelago that OMA had imagined, and now that we really have the city of the heating globe. So this is a fascinating response to those problems in a new age, 40, 50 years after that amazing exodus. So I don't know. Do we have any more time, Mohammed? I guess we're.
You have no more time, but you can. No more time. Okay. No more time. You're out of time.
Okay.
But that
turn it over.
That was worth every extra minute. Thank you so much, Michael, Jin, and Suto. No. And now we're going to move on to move to the Pyroactive city with my colleagues Liz and Kian. I'm going to hand over to the moderator.
Great. Hello, thank you very much. I'm Liz from Tohoku University, and it's been my pleasure to be involved in this network over the multiple series of studios. And I'm here in Tokyo. I wish that you could all be here with me and see the exhibit that's opening today, but I know it's on its way to LA, so my colleagues from UCLA will have a chance to see it in your own neighborhood soon. So today, yeah, it's really my honor to be part of this conversation with Kian Go from UCLA and also Mohammed Sharif, who's stepping in for Ron Real, who is teaching the related studio at UC Berkeley. And our topic is the pyroactive city. So before we get into what I hope will be a wild and fiery discussion, and I'll ask each one of my panelists to share your own, how you situate your own work within the ideas of pyroactivity and regenerative urbanism. But I thought I'd like to share first the definition that I was given to kind of frame, to frame our discussion about what it is we're talking about. So the pyroactive cities use a high degree of management precision and careful scenario planning to maintain the symbiotic coexistence between wild environments and urban boundaries while respecting existing ecosystems. At these boundaries, citizens take responsibility and redefine the traces of their settlements and the surrounding ignitable ecosystems, creating a new equilibrium. Here, flexible and safe relationships for humans and nature are created through planned buffer zones, concentric development patterns with redundancy, and agricultural activities that respond to seasonal changes in the ecosystem. So I think one of the reasons that this topic is so exciting to me, and I've had the chance to talk with some of the folks who are involved in these themes and these studios, is I think it really brings to the focus of what we're talking about: hazards, settlements, nature, and the interaction, and especially the buffer zone. I think by now we've noticed all of the overlapping and shared commonalities between the other panels, but I think here in our pyroactive city, we really get down to this edge condition and boundary zone and negotiations that are really interesting and exciting. So I'd like to really turn it over to my colleagues, and maybe I can ask Kian first, if you would share how you see the issues of regenerative urbanism, or specifically pyroactivity in your work, or in where you're working in your local context.
Thank you, Liz. And I want to thank the organizers of this whole symposium. It's been really exciting to follow the project from the start and then see where it is right now with this volume 4 of regenerative urbanism. So my name is Kian Goth. I'm a faculty member in urban planning at UCLA. And so one of the things, first, what I'll say is that as opposed to, I think, many of the folks here, I was not a studio instructor for this event, for this initiative, but working with Hitoshi on this, I've been able to get some glimpse into the work and the processes through his studio, and a little bit less Jeffrey Inaba's studio. So really happy to be able to comment in that light. So the first thing I'll say is I moved to Los Angeles 6 years ago from the US Northeast. And one of the things that becomes immediately clear is the kinds of the almost like the dire situation that we find ourselves in for about a half of the year in the fire season, where you don't know necessarily that there will be a big fire close by, but you can almost expect one to happen. And that when something happens, and because of the nature of fires, you may not be in the direct path of harm's way, these like really rapid violent fires, but you see the impacts throughout the city, often throughout the urban region. And this sort of new lifestyle really of living under constant threat of fire that is not only getting worse because of climate change, but quite rapidly getting worse these days. Almost every year, either in Southern California, or Northern California, or along any of the Western states in the US, we see among the worst fires happening, resetting that record every day. So one of the things that I did when I initially arrived in LA after a fire in 2019, the Saddle Ridge fire that happened pretty close by in Los Angeles. So I really wanted to see what happens in these places when a fire like that happens. This is not among the bigger ones. And the interesting thing to me, a couple of things. One is that there wasn't a whole lot of urban design and architectural initiatives that were focused precisely on this kind of problem, the increasing risk of wildfires, and the fact that we are more and more pushing our developments or residential areas into the wildland urban interface, the WUI, as is well known in these parts. So we're increasingly making our risks worse at the same time where the risks are getting already increasing, are increasing. So where are the urban design and architectural initiatives to take this on? That's one thing. The second thing is, well, it almost brings to mind the really, the underlying issues in how we live and work in cities, that a particular focus, certainly in LA, but in the US more broadly, on home ownership and private property really makes it very difficult to rethink new ways to live better and protect ourselves better from the threat of fire. So those two things, the lack of urban design and architecture, and this unwillingness really of many of us to confront some of the underlying systems that put us at further risk. So that's really how I came to this issue. So if you look at the video of the pyroactive city that accompanies the exhibition, you'll see three different designs, right? Three kinds of visions of the new city. One is the edited edge, the other is the agri-belt, and the third is city seed. And I'll just say, like, maybe, I don't know if Mohammad's going to follow this up with more description. I'll say maybe one or two lines for what they are. So the edited edge is a design for really these buffer zones, concentric bands between the wildland areas that are prone to fire and the built up urban settlements. And the idea is that these bands will function as a new kind of intermediate landscape made by community members. I think this is an interesting thing, made by community members clearing the landscape, forming greater community bonds in order to build a new way of living in adjacency to the fire-prone landscapes. So they build spaces for markets. They clear land for energy-producing infrastructure, like large windmills, and it really functions as a new kind of zoning system to create a symbiotic relationship between urban and wildland. The second one, agri-belt, also functions in a similar way as a buffer, but in this case relies on agriculture, new kinds of agricultural interventions in places that confront that confront lots of fires, where increased planting enables an increase in water retention and organic matter. So it adds to the suppressive qualities of the landscape. And that these new planted areas can then take on a kind of like autonomous regional economy through the agriculture and the corresponding tourism. So it's an interesting way to really harness the power of ecology in this case as a way to protect community, protect settlement, and to boost a different kind of industrial, agricultural base. And then the third one, City Seed, really interesting proposal to have a new residential model that can literally be in the wildland urban or in the fire zones. And these are really like earthen buildings that are set primarily under the ground, popping up above ground, surrounded by water storage that can help protect and protect the houses, and as well be an infrastructure for firefighters when it actually burns. And the idea is that fires are allowed to sweep through these residential areas, and when they do, they actually fire and harden the earthen buildings. It becomes a kind of like continual clay remaking of the settlement. And I think, this is really, it's almost like literally a kind of regenerative urbanism where the fire is allowed to spur the next round of habitation. So I found these super interesting, and I just had maybe 3 questions about them. So they bring design very directly to this problem, how to live with fire. Literally, what happens if one were to live in a house that is set in a way that a violent fire can actually cross over? And it wasn't clear to me whether you would be there or whether you would leave and come back after the fire had passed by. But a really interesting concept. Design pushing these boundaries, bringing new social conditions to the fire zone, also bringing new materialities, burnable settlements. So I thought that was really cool. And I love how design interventions in this case might push more regulatory structures, like a change in zoning and code. At the same time, I do wonder a couple of things. Whether pushing this vision of coexisting with fires will simply encourage more building in fire-prone zones. We already push into the wildland-urban interface because of housing costs and our development patterns. Would a design solution only make that kind of incursion worse? In a different context of climate change, so the discourse around stronger storms and sea level rise, in the last few years, there's been a real shift, especially 2-3 years, a real shift to thinking about managed retreat. How do we, carefully with premeditation, move away from the risk? For wildfires, which are not as predictable. You don't see the sea level, the creeping change in such the same way. Is there no concept of a kind of managed retreat? Or I know there is, but how would we design for it? And then, yeah. Oh, you actually, I think that's a perfect place to stop. So Mohammed, please go ahead.
No.
Thank you so much.
Kian, like you, I'm a fellow traveler of the initiative. I have a very good understanding of what Toshi Abe has been up to, what Jeffrey and Abe has been up to, and certainly in the times that I've interacted with Ron Rael at Berkeley through the initiative. I mean, that's whose very large shoes I'm trying to fill today a little bit. I think one thing that's worth remembering, it's a sort of to mix up my Greek goddesses and gods, there's this sort of Promethean Gaian situation. Of all the disasters that we're discussing, this one statistically is the one that is most in our control, in that 90% of wildfires are actually instigated by human activity. Certainly, Mother Earth has her cycles and they make sense. But we tend to exacerbate those cycles merely by going to places where there is fuel and where utilities are feeding, those fuels. So certainly, if human beings are going to inhabit the WUI, they should behave with humility. And so I think whether it's planning or best sort of building practices, these are certainly things that we could adopt. Certainly here, in the Wild West, the kind of the edge of frontierism, there is a libertarian strain that says we must be at the WUI, and so be it. But I think that if we acknowledge that of the catastrophic scenarios that's most in our control, it's this one, then I actually think Ron's approach at the design scale, sort of the earthen approach, he actually took a very kind of market-based approach, prototyping, patenting, sinking into the public imagination as something that could actually be, that could help you withstand and help you resist. I think that's a good step in the right direction. And I love, I mean, there's a poetry to earth, being earth and digging and profiling in ways that, frankly, I'll say in our professional practice, we have woolsey fire projects. And guess what the planning department does to encourage rebuilding? It says you can have a like for like plus 10%. And so, could you then talk to them about planning system without a UL number? No, they're not going to support that technical innovation, but they're going to support more footprint, more volume as a kind of guilt something or other. In any case, I feel like the three scenarios you described and their titles are really good ones, and hopefully ones that we can embrace and expand upon, knowing that of all of the disaster scenarios, this is the one that we can be best behaved around.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I just would like to let you guys keep talking forever, but Mohammed is already here, so I'm not sure when he's going to cut off our panel. But
take a couple of minutes, Liz, at least, please.
Okay, I just wanted to, just thank you both again, and kind of highlight some of the really important things that I think we just heard. And I also really appreciate Kian situating us, because I think I don't really understand what it is to live in the fire district. I think that's something that you folks know in a different way, living where you are, where the fight, it's an immediate, urgent, and growing so fast. It's not a risk that's coming, it's a risk that's here, and it's exponentially growing. It's like our house is on fire, literally. And I think that from the hazards, in the hazards research world internationally, we're not really aware of that internationally the same way that you folks are aware of it locally. So I really appreciate that, bringing that to us. And also, I think the larger expansion of how the scale of our thinking, it's not design and building envelope requirements and what's available is also important, but I think bringing it to the next level of, it's not just the ecosystem, it's also the economic interaction. It's also like the limitation of private property, and how, we need more of a kind of a fundamental shifting in order to resolve these issues. And then finally, I think Mohammed's point that you brought up is that fire is most in our control is a really interesting thing to think about, especially in just juxtaposed with Kian's point about the similarity between managed retreat of fire and sea level rise. So I think these things are all like really connected, and I think it really gets to the core of what we're talking about with regenerative urbanism and how to think about risks and hazards, because we don't have natural disasters, right? Like we understand that there are these natural phenomenons in fires, but the disaster happens because of how we interact with the risk as a human settlement and a human society. And so I think we're getting to the point we need to think about more fundamental, bigger shifts in order to really address those issues. So I think maybe that's maybe if you folks have like a final comment that you want to add, but otherwise I think we're getting close to wrapping up time, if I understand correctly.
Kiana, unless you have anything to say, I'd say we'd keep the dialogue open with the Dialogic city coming up.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. Liz, thank you so much for the intro and
Thank
the summary
you.
there.
Thank you, Liz.
Mohammed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Kian.
much.
Thank you. And now the Dialogic city.
Yes, we are, Mohammed. Thank you very much.
Great to see you again, sir.
Great to see you too. So good morning to you, good evening to us here at the exact other side of the world. We are very happy to be introducing this Dialogic City discussion with Professor Ishida and Professor Schmidt. We will be trying to outline a few highlights of what we have seen in the exhibition and hope to raise your interest on these presentations. We will try to comment on what we have seen reciprocally. So to say, we will not present our students' work. Instead, we will comment on the others to kick off a broader discussion on this topic that, as the other topics too, is quite intriguing and provoking. And we thank very much the editors for compiling this bundle of works together under such provoking concepts. So this idea of dialogic city, we see as a maybe more abstract take on the overall overarching topic of the sessions, and sort of brings us to a more maybe human, maybe social idea of dialogue, of interaction among people, probably. However, of course, there would be other counterpoints to make as of scales, as of history, generations, and I hope we will see the depth of these sort of dimensions in the discussion. So I will first then offer the word to Professor Toshikazu Ishida from Tohoku University to comment a bit on one of the positions in our video under Dialogic City that you will hopefully, of course, be interesting to watch too, called Cooling Townscape. So Professor Ishida, please, if you will open the fires with your comments.
Yeah, actually, thank you, Professor Dalcon. I missed the first part. Sorry, I'm a bit late to join this small table. Actually, the cooling townscape. What I have, understood is that the common future, not only the cooling townscape, but also the common future of these three projects, including the community trail and the Tohoku's project. The common feature is to examine the kind of a small intervention rather than mega scale infrastructure using the green infrastructure and very daily environment issues. That is one of the feature I have in my images. Sorry, I missed the first introduction of what you have done, so maybe the answer is long. Okay.
Please go ahead, Professor Ishida. I think you're in the right path.
Mm-hmm. So I think that the other feature is kind of the critical vernacular approaches towards our local conditions and the local context, using the kind of bottom-up approaches to the comprehensive community urban design, and not the top-down mega infrastructures. Those are the common feature of the three projects. That's what I have my impression of the project.
Thank you. Then maybe I should offer the word to Professor Christian Schmidt, also from Universidad Católica de Chile, who will be commenting on the memorial landscape position of Tohoku University students. Professor Schmidt.
Thank you, Renato. Maybe may I piggyback on what Professor Ishida just commented and take it from there with his project, the Memorial Landscape from the Tohoku University, that deals mostly with heritage towns that have been affected by tsunamis, often affected by tsunamis, and how the proposal uses canals and forests as natural resources to prevent future disasters as buffers, as how we have seen before. The key issue about the proposal, I think it also recognizes the cultural value of these towns, their history, the work done by their ancestors, and how these solutions also incorporate this as part of the proposal. So you have to deal with preventing the disaster without compromising the cultural value of these towns. Also, the proposal by the Tohoku University considers the current use of these gaps, of these buffers, and they can be also used as for transportation or tourism or also business. So there are lots of inputs for the proposal that enriches the result, the solution. So summarizing and trying to bring it to our own experience is how you, on one side, use natural resources as a tool to prevent future disasters, but also how you read those cultural values and take it as part of the design. And here's probably the most dialogical part of these projects is how you incorporate communities to be part of these processes, as we have also seen on the other two projects. If we relate this to our own experience back in Chile, I can't help thinking about earthquakes and how the latest one, the big one, affected a lot of heritage towns. And we faced the challenge to rebuild those towns, but also keep the cultural value. And it was a really tough discussion with the locals, with the town, the villagers, to how to keep this and also rebuild the cities and understand that these cities build upon layers of urbanism and landscape. So it brings us back at this one of the principles of heritage reconstruction or heritage design, that is always a case by case solution. So you have to look into every single case with an overall picture, but you have to adjust it and bring it down to earth according to those very specific situation and cultural values that are bring from the history of each town. It's very interesting what Professor Ishii just commented about the bottom-up design, that I think it's fundamental for this kind of projects. And also, if you have any insights of how you think we can involve communities to preserve this heritage value that we commented before.
Thank you, Professor Schmidt. The third of the positions in this Dialogic city well is that entitled Community Trial by the Tsinghua University team led by Professor De Yin. And I will try and summarize it for you, as it raises a quite interesting thing, quite a different context to that of the previous positions, where in a rural context, in a rural village, a sort of persistence of the traditional practices of the production of the land, as of producing plum wine, sort of support a current or contemporary interpretation of these traditions towards a modernity, still remote village, but is articulated through tourism, through visiting, and through production, updated to current practices and methods, of course, and into a sort of a very sensitive synthesis of old and new, so to say, of traditional and contemporary, which is, I think, something that we all encounter all the time and see as a palimpsest articulating in the cities, especially those cities affected by natural disasters or sudden change, such persistences and such continuities of the urban against such innovation of the human, so to say, that is part of our own nature to change, to evolve and to aim towards the new and the improvement, collide in a provoking situation. I think this is also present in the other works, and then I would like to go into more what underlies all these positions, where in particular the one of the Tohoku University, the memorial landscape is, yes, maybe a heritage village, but as I understood Professor Ishida, there's a focus on the tsunamis themselves and the reaction to them and the way they are integrated in the urban tissue and the way they are contained and adapted to constitutes itself a kind of heritage, kind of a persistence over time, where the dialogue is not only today, but it refers to depth of years in the history. Am I right? Is that more or less what you were outlining in your survey and research?
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, when we start our studio, the Tohoku University studio, first we re-evaluate last decade, 10 years after March 11th, 2011. Actually, the 2015 year, Sendai framework was adopted and Build Back Better policy was implemented sufficiently. And as you may know, the incredibly long seawall, defensive dikes, and the evacuation hills, and many disaster risk reduction policy-based infrastructure was made. But on the other hand, the reality shows a different facet, like depopulation tendency. It is still going on, continues. Even though the older community coastal front risk was reduced and guarded by a very advanced seawall, local people still yet not coming back to their original community. So what was done and what was not done to judge that feature is a very essential question for our studio. So looking back the history of this region, and the magnitude 9.0 magnitude the earthquake is not the first time. Already last 2,000 years in a modern force. And even as you may know, we just had a magnitude 7.3 earthquake last month, and 1 year ago, we have a very frequent huge, large scale of earthquake, and local community people that tend to understand that this is a kind of a vernacular for the living conditions. So we cannot disregard the whole historical heritage of the local people, which is sometimes erased by the last decades. This times implementation of the mega infrastructure. So especially the current problems of the local community is not the mega structures covered community building up settlement, but the people's very daily and small talk, daily conversation based, green infrastructure based, kind of intangible, invisible, collective memory should be inherited. That is one of the essential issue that our studio approached.
Yeah, I think that's very, very clear. I think you also hit another key that strikes me as relevant in this idea of dialectics in the city that you mentioned. I think also Professor Schmidt mentioned that is the one that regards, different social groups, politicians on the one side that operate on a very structured top-down way of addressing the problems, and at the same time the bottom-up community-based initiatives or resistance to that, to whatever politicians propose. I think that is something that you commented on the work of cooling townscape that refers to a way of administrating water access as to irrigate small green areas that have, of course, quite a relevant impact at a very limited scale, and at the same time, articulated with the community interest, offer a sort of a particular result that is nor top-down nor bottom-up. So that's, I think, interesting enough. I see that too when it comes to this idea of community trail, Professor Schmidt. I think you also saw it in that presentation, that it is maybe mostly community-based, mostly articulated, but also affected by these events, landslides, earthquakes, etc., more retreated, but still in a context that is broader and that is more structured. So these dialogues, I would argue, refer to, actors, people, social groups that interact. It refers to scales of urban, huge scales, smaller scales. It refers to time, as of heritage and being recovered today. So any comments on your side, Professor Schmidt, in that regard?
Yeah, I think you just nailed it there. It's we cannot forget about what you just said. There are also politics. There's the government, there's the communities, and there's the designers, and we cannot forget about they're all working together. So I think one of the most important challenges it's this project management, is how you relate them all and make them work together to make them feasible at the end. And it's great that students are getting a little glimpse of that, a little taste of what that challenge is and how reality is, and also that it's possible to work out these great projects as a real solution for these challenges. As you mentioned, this how see a problem turn into opportunities, what we just talked about. We're talking about this gap that is just to prevent a tsunami, also can be used as a public space. You can use for communities, can be used, turn into something positive for the community, and also how to they give it some value, some cultural value to that space that could be merely functional, but now it's a part of the community. I think that's the goal, and it's something that we won't be able to achieve just by design. It has to be complemented with the politics of each city and the community as well. So yeah, it's not easy. I think it's quite a challenge, but I think we're heading the right way.
Thank you. Professor Ishida, a final remark on your side, so we wrap the session, this small table, since Professor Schmidt was addressing the issue of tsunamis.
Okay. I'm touching about the honeycomb common. That project is also our studios that was discussed in the first small table. And what we are focusing on the honeybee approaches is that the honeybee is an extremely sensitive antenna for the environmental changes. So the people often understand that the mega earthquake or some disaster, natural disaster, as a sudden large incident. However, according to the biologist, the honeybee shows that daily small changes. So that affects finally, a big natural disasters. So judging from the historical fact that we are now current people as losing the sensitive antenna to other nature environmental changes. So yeah, the studio students try to sharpen their antenna for the nature changes. So that is a kind of a honeybee harvest quality, all the connected to that's kind of a well-beings. So our studio's well-beings beings are honeybee beings. So yeah.
Turning students into bees. I like that.
Wonderful. Maybe we have contributed a bit with this work, and we hope to interest the viewers to go and see the exhibition, as to keep grasp of things not being too far away from our senses and sensibility. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Schmidt, Professor Ishida. Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you.
Colleagues, thank you, Renato. Now we're going to take a short break, a 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back with the final two cities, the chronosystemic city and the nomadic city. So see everyone in 10. Thanks again, Renato and colleagues.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
And I'll share it for Dan, for you and I, Dan.
Okay, so I've just made some slight modifications. So it's in It's
So
in the
maybe
slide.
it's better if you share your own. Yeah.
It's in the folder. It's in the folder.
I did some changes too. So anyway,
Uh-oh.
That's the problem.
Then maybe just use the title slide that I just created, and then you can add that to whatever you have if you're working in PowerPoint.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. Great to see you.
Nice to see you.
So I think we're live streaming now. And without further ado, I will introduce the chronosystemic city and hand over to moderator Ken Tadashi Oshima.
Well, welcome. It's great to be here with my colleagues to discuss the chronosystemic city. And here I will share my screen to look at what we'd like to address of the chronosystemic city in relationship to design for the extraordinary and everyday. In the description of the chronosystemic city, we see that it incorporates landscapes, buildings, and infrastructure consists of time-based resilient planning and design that incorporates context-sensitive phased habitation growth and management strategies. The city is conceptualized along a temporal spectrum from the planned endurance to planned obsolescence against recurring disaster. It is an infinite choreography of growth and adaptation, an environment in the dynamic equilibrium where the components of the city are flexibly replaced, switched, removed, and exchanged in order to survive and thrive. And so to just start things off, we will be looking at the example of the case of Westport South Beach, which my colleague Dan Abramson will discuss. to being.
Great, Ken. Do you want to advance the slides or?
Yes. Are you seeing the slides now? Oh,
I do. Yeah, but they're not in presenter view actually.
Put it in presenter view. Yeah.
Okay, here. Let me see. I have to switch this. Swap displays. Sorry. All right. Are you seeing that in the actual?
Nope, not yet.
Not yet.
Let's see here. That's not it.
No, but
Not
what
yet.
I can do, Ken, is share my screen.
Oh, here
there
we go. Here we go.
Was that it? Yes. That's something.
I think actually, let me do it this way. Sorry. And let me swap screens this way. Sorry. Put my cursor over here. All right.
Right, thanks. So as Ken started out by saying that this project from the coast of Washington State fits the theme of the chronosystematic city in that we are looking at rather extreme timescales of change, even as we are also trying to design for the everyday improvement of life in the community. And what we have in the Pacific Northwest in the United States is a unique combination of what is normally not very severe sea level rise threats on the outer coast, the Pacific coast of our state, on the Pacific Rim, but the only part of the United States in the 48 states, not including Alaska, that sits on a subduction zone and is threatened by major subduction zone earthquakes and tsunamis of the kind that we see elsewhere all around the Pacific Rim. So it's the part of the United States, 48 lower states, that shares the most with many of the other countries and cities that we are looking at in this entire network of studios in this ArcDR3 project. And when such an earthquake happens, which occurs roughly every 250 to 500 years, quite rarely here compared to elsewhere around the Pacific Rim, then the subsidence that occurs along the coast, changes in the earth relative to the sea level, will exacerbate whatever global changes in sea level have occurred and suddenly make that problem much worse. And it varies quite dramatically from place to place locally along the coast as to how that would play out. So we're looking at very long recurrence intervals between these events. And it's only quite recently that we even begin to understand that we have this hazard facing us and are beginning to be able to calculate probabilities of these events occurring in any given year or 50-year period based on increasing evidence from geology of when they have occurred in the past. So we can move on to the next slide. At the same time, as I mentioned, we are facing sea level rise as a global phenomenon. And that too is being modeled probabilistically in terms of how severe the scenarios may be in the future. So let's move on next. And we are working very locally. So these models can be tailored to the very specific conditions of the coastline in specific locations. And in order to ensure that investments in safety, in vertical evacuation structures or in other evacuation systems, mitigation investments on infrastructure and where settlements can be located, all has to take what is, by the state's law and the standards of the industry, the worst case into account, which is a 2,500-year event, rather than even a 250 to 500-year event, which is a much more severe event and would inundate whole communities along the coast. And we're working with one of those communities, Westport, which sits very close to sea level on a sand spit in the south side of Grays Harbor. Okay, next. Already the community, in response to these the science, and has planned and built the first vertical evacuation structure in North America at the Acosta Elementary School. The structure is robust and designed to withstand those very worst case events, but it is also it was also an investment in the facility of the school, which is used every day by the staff and children of the community, and is really an example of a commitment of the community to its future generations' survival, funded entirely by local property tax. There was no federal subsidy for this. So our project really builds on this accomplishment. If we look next, we'll see how, levering that commitment, we've engaged the community using sophisticated participatory GIS tools that look at multiple scenarios of earthquake and tsunami, as well as sea level rise. And moving on from there, the effects both of the immediate inundation by the tsunami are modeled, but also the permanent or longer lasting, much longer lasting subsidence effects of coastline loss, given the shifting land level after the earthquake. Interestingly, these would happen very suddenly, but they are very similar to the same kinds of effects that would occur with sea level rise over a longer period. If you look at the next slide, we've also presented these to the community with a series of different time horizons and probabilities associated with how severe the inundation and coastline shoreline loss would be. So what, from a design and planning point of view, this presents the community is both an opportunity to plan for more than one hazard at once, sometimes with the same strategy, but to do so according to different severity levels and different onsets, rapidity of onset and time horizons of when any kind of investment would have to be completed. If we move next, we'll see how, and at the same time, in order to make those investments palatable and acceptable and economically feasible for the community, they have to serve some current function and need. Moving next. This is a very important aspect of this in terms of the temporal dimension too, is that we look backwards as well as forwards. So the peninsula on which the community now sits itself has undergone an enormous amount of change in just the last 150 years since European settlers came and built there. Of course, native indigenous populations have absorbed this change and this dynamism of the landscape into their culture and into their settlement practices over many hundreds of years. But just the experience within 150 years of seeing how much of the community has accreted or eroded away has given the a multi-generational sense of perspective on how much change might yet occur and how to plan for that. Let's move on next.
So very briefly, looking at the way this affects the everyday in terms of housing, we see various strategies of amphibious housing in low cost, simple to build, almost do-it-yourself housing that addresses both sea level rise and disaster, but thinking of the effect on communities and thinking of this as a broader strategy as one to look at both time and the broader place in the everyday. And so briefly, I know we have very little time showing the kind of range of what this is, not only in terms of housing of the everyday or the everyday experience of public space, natural environments that incorporate the evacuation structures to integrate with natural topographies. And so how all of this can be part of the everyday as well as the extreme is all part of this that you see here outlined. And so in looking to chronosystemic Hong Kong, I pass the baton on to Natalia.
Yeah.
And I can get out here to share your screen if you like.
Okay. Oh. Okay, so just continuing with the conversation about time and this idea of systemic city, Hong Kong, you can also be part of a chronosystemic city as well. The work from Hong Kong U. So Hong Kong is somewhat fortunate in possessing a mainly steep coastal topography, which makes it less susceptible to possible consequences of sea level rise. However, we have a really long history of living with typhoons and tropical storms. So typhoon season normally happens between the months of May and October, but the events have started to spread over April and November, and it's happening more often, and the typhoons are becoming more strong. Also, what's interesting in Hong Kong is that we have two main seasons. So we have a very rainy season that there's excessive water, and then there's also a very dry season in the winter. A typical section of Hong Kong has a very steep slopes, and the coastal edge is mostly reclaimed around the island and in areas in the north in Kowloon. To deal with typhoons and flooding, Hong Kong has been highly engineered. I think in general, Hong Kong is it's a city that's completely engineered. So to protect the coastal edge, it has these massive seawalls that have replaced this rich intertidal zone. And then at the top of the mountains, it has a water catchment system on the steep slopes to collect surface runoff and quickly release excess water into the ocean. The Hong Kong Youth Studio, what we did we tackled these issues, and at the beginning of the studio, how we set up the methodology is that landscape students started working with architecture students, and the first part of the exercise was to create this new ground that challenged the typical coastal edge and also issues of this quick water discharge. So for example, in this proposal, some of these students proposed to continue the slope to improve connectivity. They then added more complexity to the coastal edge to increase habitat niches and increase biodiversity. And they also started to divert water to be purified and then reutilized on site. They also proposed terrace landscape to create new programs. These new spaces that they proposed are resilient to flood risk and adaptable to the changing water levels. And they are utilized in the everyday, I think they take advantage of the different seasonality of very hot season and also winter dryness. This section shows how the terraces can be used to create water filter systems. And also at the edge, the students designed this water edge that has more complexity to bring new niches of habitat, but also, and water collection, but also create multiple grounds to deal with the different sea level. And lastly, the students then started thinking about kind of like the tower and how the tower could also adapt to this new landscape, this new edge condition. In this process, they considered a structure and building programs that would absorb, that wouldn't be seen in abstract isolation, but it would be an integration. They would be completely integrated to the ecological strategy that considered the changing environment. So to conclude, the chronosystemic city utilizes the forms and processes of adaptation and flexible use to choreograph new social and ecological connections in the city.
In some ways, it's very interesting that we have the extremes of the vertical and the horizontal between the two sides of the Pacific, while we are connected along the Pacific Rim of Fire. We have the commonality of these integrative responses to landscapes and these threats that face us, but when we look at the temporalities of seasons and the water in particular, I find it interesting that, you know, we face the kind of opposites of in the Pacific Northwest, a dry summer and a wet winter, whereas what Natalie is outlining in Hong Kong is quite the opposite. And so we do have this contrasting perspective of the two sides.
Well, thank you very much, Ken and Daniel and Natalia. Ken, wait, did you have something else to say?
No, I'm sorry, there was a technical glitch. I didn't hear all of it, but no, it's really the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can.
We have a lot to say, and if there were any questions, it's hard to fill up the rest of the 8 minutes, the remaining 8 minutes, with just some more. But if there are some questions from any of the attendees, maybe that would be a way.
Are we at the time? Like,
yeah, you're actually at the time.
Yeah,
we
I
are
guess
at the time.
To follow what Ken was talking about at the end, I think what's interesting of the seasonality and also the changes of climate is that to design, and it's the challenge of the students, that you're designing for these moments that don't occur often, that maybe happen once a year or maybe twice a year, but then you're also dealing with issues of seasonal changes, at least in the case of Hong Kong. Like, you're designing to protect for typhoon, but in a different way than the traditional way of doing seawalls. Then it's a way that's much more ecological. So that you bring in different types of communities, from kind of biodiversity to people. But also you have to think about these two seasonalities that happen throughout the year, because you have like excessive water. So the landscapes of the spaces that you design in the summer and April look lush. But in the dry seasons, it's different, because it's dried out. There's almost no water. So I think that gives another layer to kind of like the things that students need to design, and also thinking about kind of like the flexibility and the multifunctionality of the spaces.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Chronosystemic team. I'm now going to hand over to the final panel. Moderated by Don Bates from Melbourne, the Nomadic City.
Okay, thank you very much, Mohammed. And thanks everybody that's still with us today. We're the last panel presentation and discussion. And as Mohammed said, we're talking about the nomadic city, which in a certain way is a kind of paradox or a quandary. When we talk about a city, we tend to talk about permanence and solidity and certainty. And usually when I would think of nomadic, I would think of nomadic cultures, definitely, you know, cultures that would move because of seasonal changes, acknowledging grazing lands that have to be moved between the wintertime and the summertime, between an understanding of seasonal fluxes in terms of the availability of resources and opportunities. Now we're talking about it in terms of the city. So what does this mean in terms of the city? And I think in terms of the presentations, it partly has to do with the question of permanence and how do we deal, what is the role of permanence when we have catastrophic or disaster events that happen at unpredictable times? So not seasonal changes where we know between fall and spring what we might do, but actually unexpected natural disasters or disasters, whether they're man-made or otherwise. So in looking at this, I think the interest here about the nomadic city is, in a certain way, it's looking at a design for uncertainty, a design for the possibility of change as a necessity to accommodate the uncertainties of where our environment is taking us, where certain events are happening in increasing frequencies, but again, unknown frequencies of when these might happen. So we have two presentations. The first one that we have is with Lara Asensio Valoria. Lara is a senior lecturer at the University of Melbourne in the Melbourne School of Design and the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning. She's taught previously at Harvard University in the Graduate School of Design and at the Architectural Association in London, and has a number of books and publications that relate to some of these very issues. And then we'll have a presentation by Professor Toshio Atsuki from Tokyo University, where he's a professor in the Department of Architecture in the Graduate School of Engineering at the University of Tokyo. So I'll turn this over, if that's okay, to Lara and let Lara do her presentation.
Thank you, Don. I'll just share my screen. So I hope everybody can hear me well. With regards to the nomadic city at the University of Melbourne, through a number of studios and projects that I'm going to illustrate now, we will try to talk about how the studios and the outcomes of the studios have looked at the idea of the city as something that is related to time. This idea of the nomadic city as a more transformable and adaptive city that changes the way that it is used depending on different climatic situations. It is something that is played out in some of the works here. So in this project by Laura, Kyla, Martin, and Sam, at the much larger scale of urbanism, there is an idea that the infrastructure of the city is activated depending on the different times and depending on different kinds of scenarios. So depending on what kind of flooding risk is being triggered at certain times, you can see in the diagrams actually and the corresponding plans on the left-hand side of the slide, the idea that these are all interconnected through an Internet of Things logic. So you will actually have different parts of the urban infrastructure largely facilitated through green infrastructure and canals, and they will be activated depending on the different scenarios. So there is this idea that rather than an optimized singular series of infrastructures, there is a distributed, integrated green infrastructure in the city, which gets turned on and off depending on the scenario and the different types of risk. The differences between the flooded scenarios and steady state moments will also result in changes of the nature of these spaces. So you can see in the detail scale on the right-hand side, you see an integrated space in the city, an urban plaza, and its bike lanes, pedestrian paths, and how that responds to incidents of flooding and how it operates in other times. So this idea of the nomadic city is also very much influenced by an attitude that the studio has taken towards a reading of the city. So in many ways, we have tried not to think so much of the city as a kind of a stable place, but more as a series of urban metabolisms where flows, transfer of or exchanges of resources, energy, material, waste, and population are things that constitute the specific qualities of a particular site. So there is a kind of attitude that is adopted with regards to the city where we understand it not as being singular or a stable idea, but it's really something subject to all these exchanges. So then as a consequence of that, students needed to think about different designs at a tangible architecture and urban design and landscape scales. This required thinking about how new public spaces can be sensitive to temporal changes. So how they adapt or transform depending on differences in this urban metabolism, such as during floods or droughts. So this included a range of material proposals, such as the integration of elevated walkways in the public realm that we see on the right-hand side of the slide, and the kind of floodable public plazas that you see on the left. At another level, more associated with the larger urban metabolisms related to the cycles of food, energy, and waste, the nomadic city will also need to be rethought in relationship to the new kinds of infrastructures that will actually be needed to support a much more resilient and regenerative model of urbanism. So where those flows and exchanges can somehow be safeguarded and put into more circular associations. We can see some examples on the bottom left, where the food production and energy infrastructure that have a cyclical relationship to waste cycles become embedded into the city and become new civic infrastructures that are part of the public realm of this nomadic city. I will turn now to Toshio Tsuki from Tokyo University.
Thank you. So I would like to share my slide. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So I'm Otsuki from Tokyo University. I would like to talk about the nomadic city based on the experience of our redesign studio in summer semester 2020 and 21. In this studio, we have a long history. In this studio, we are targeting the various types of the land in Japan. We started this series of studio from 2014. The first time we focused on Kobe earthquake and Hiroshima water disaster and Tokyo metropolitan earthquake. So, this is 2019 and 2020. This time, for 2 years, we focused on the Tokyo metropolitan city. The city, the targeted city is Koto City. You can see this is the location of Koto City. You can see this city is surrounded by 2 big rivers and the sea. And it is, you have to memorize that almost all the city land level is lower than the sea level. And almost all the land is reclaimed land historically. So this is a basic information of our studio. Students from the Department of Civil Engineering and Architecture and Urban Engineering we have to say this proposal from students is not so much focused on architectural design, but also focused on the city planning or national scale. They try to draw a new image of urban space as pre-disaster recovery design for Tokyo. So this is some assignment. We divided students into seven groups, and they have to consider earthquake causing destruction of building and fires, and they have to consider flood damage caused by the earthquake, as well as heavy rain, high tide, dike break by earthquake. They also consider a timeline from 2020 to 2050, in which any time the earthquake and damage will come. The students were suggested to survey the history, hazard maps, land use, social and demographic change. So I'd like to show you some ideas from the outputs from the studio through remaking the city, not through big redevelopment, and also thinking about a nomadic city. Some groups tried connect different use of land. This urban area is a very, very mosaic city. You can see from this photo, congested wooden houses area surrounding the high-rise public housing next to small rivers here. And how to connect these different items is one challenge. And connecting different vertical level, this is also the challenge for them. And connecting islands, you can see this city consists of small islands like this. So they have to connect these islands with bridges, not only bridges, but also some other items. So they consider the connecting land and water. The previous time, there was a razor-shaped bank like this, but how to create this kind of waterfront, that was their topic. And this is also very important for the nomadic idea, new mobility method. They created new mobility on the water, on the road, and they considered smaller and green mobility like this. And as for the nomadic city, in the movie Nomadland, cars were the base of living space and mobility. In fact, from the experience of our studio, we have to think about small-scale nomadic city. From the preparation for the preparation for quick change, from the normal time and from the normal time to the emergency time. So it is very, I think, important the connection and the new mobility method. Connection between different types of houses and land use, different vertical level of the buildings, different connection between land and water, connection between islands. Those connection concept is very important, and also the new mobility method is important. And furthermore, we have to think about, this is a mistake, big scale nomadic city, multiple location or multiple bases to living. In Japan, more and more cities are participating into evacuation agreements with local cities. If there is agreement in the big city, if you encounter the big disaster, you can run out of the city to the targeted local city. And the other point is phenomena promoted by COVID. Nomadic style accelerated by the time of COVID because of remote technology, which we are using now. One item is subscription residence service. Here in Japan, there is a big fashion of in individual level based on tourism. If you pay some portion of money, you can use the registered houses all over Japan, and you can nomad. If you subscribe, you can nomad in your way. And the other option is workation. This is a new word which is created from the word of work and vacation. Big companies in Japan are now trying to this system. They can have their seasonal vacation to the local site, and also they can also work there. So we are now trying to realize this kind of vacation in terms of nomadic city. I think this is the last one. The challenge should be connecting the above two, the small scale and big scale nomadic city, how we can connect these two items. Thank you, that's all from me.
Great, thank you very much, Professor. Maybe we'll just open up and have a bit of a conversation based around some of the work that's been presented, as well as that's in the video that's been made for the nomadic city. I think one of the things I wanted to come back to is something that Lara presented, and I think is a kind of fundamental condition of what we might call the nomadic city, or how we might think about it, which is that it's a move to say, I mean, I'm thinking in terms of like what we might define as the architectural brief or the urban design brief, where usually someone says, okay, this is a project, has to be about housing, it might have multiple uses and such. But what's being suggested in the work that's shown here is almost a brief that's about contradictions. It's about when there's how do you design for a drought and at the same time design for a flood? How do you design for what happens in terms of public space that's used in a particular way? And then what happens because of a flood or some other disaster event, and it has to be used in another way. So the methodology, you might say, of designing, where we tend to have a focus on a very particular utilization, and now we're talking about it's almost diametric opposite simultaneously. So you're trying to work across that. And I think this was interesting also with Professor Otsuki's presentation, when you talked about quick change. So these are not about seasonal or over the coming years. They're events that happen, and we have to adapt quickly to this. So maybe, Lara, would you like to respond to that sort of aspect of the work that you and your students have done?
Yes, definitely. I think you spot a very important question, Don, and a big challenge for the students and us, which was to get out of that idea of designing for a static moment, or something that is perhaps is not affected so much by changes over time, to all of a sudden having to think of not only seasonal changes, but moments of shock, also not designing in isolation a particular element of the city, but rather how it belongs to a metabolic process together with all the other elements, and in other words, not designing in isolation, but thinking of what role will those elements have in the city and in all these different modes and times, basically. So the word metabolism that came out in the presentation is something that was key to us, to think of the city as a metabolic system. And so that was challenging, because rather than designing the one-off, we were constantly confronting the students with iteration, with showing multiple scenarios. So constantly trying to project very different conditions and how the elements that they were designing, or in this case, this part of the city, will be not only resilient, be able to bounce back to the original state, but also regenerative. In other words, the outcome of the moments of shock or the different flood regimes or different periods of drought, et cetera, might trigger very different outcomes, basically. So that for us was very challenging and interesting at the same time.
Yeah. And Professor Otsuki, can you say a little bit more about this response to quick change and the difference between, I mean, on the one hand, you talked about planning from 2020 to 2050, but at the same time, the events are not about a 30-year period. They happen suddenly out of nowhere.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. In Japan, we are struggling with the problem of vacant houses because of we are decreasing in the number of our population. So it means that year by year, the number of vacant houses are increasing, even in center of the city, in the downtown mainly. And beside that, we have to think about that if the big earthquake comes to Tokyo, I think all the city will not banned or damaged. Some portion of our city will be damaged. That means if you can quickly change your base or location from one side to the neighbor city or neighbor towns, that will help you. So if you imagine, if you prepare for the quick change or small change to the neighbor town, neighbor city, I think it can help you very much. And at the same time, all over Japan, we have a lot of vacant houses. So if you connect those houses in the normal time, it will help you in the emergency time. That is my opinion.
Fantastic. Look, I know we could keep going on and on, but I'm going to have to turn it back over to Mohammed because I think we've completed our session and we're moving to the sort of wrap up and conclusion. So thank you again to Toshio and to Lara, and I'll turn it back over to Mohammed.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Lara. Thank you, Toshio.
Thank you.
It's fitting that we're ending on the nomadic city. As Hitoshi Abe said at the beginning of this session, this initiative, this collaboration, this collective was forged at the beginning of the pandemic. So, to end on freedom and structure and the positive, constructive tensions is fitting as we are in the long hangover of COVID, enduring the lockdowns, the shutdowns, but nevertheless coming together as a community of hope, a constructive community, a thoughtful, non-reactive community, questioning the status quo, just as the status quo became null and void. I think things are shaping up, and it's because of each and every one of you. So thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you to your students, and thank you to all of the people behind the scenes who are so significant and important to the initiative. Again, we started by wondering what the facets of a regenerative urbanism might be, and I think we might all agree that we've come a long way to do so. Again, thank you. Thank you so much. We will now, I think there we go. We're going to be waiting for the closing remarks.
皆さんこんにちは。三井不動産の北原と申します。本日の、アーク DR3 並びに、リジェネラティブアーバニズム展、これらにご尽力されました安倍先生をはじめ今村先生、そして環太平洋11の大学の皆様方、また、本日のシンポジウムにご参加いただいた各界の先生方、大変素晴らしいご議論と展示をいただき誠にありがとうございます。
Well, thank you indeed for your time despite your busy schedule, and we are here now to share our heartfelt appreciation going to each one of you. 11 years ago, of course, we had March 11, 2011. Actually, we had a big earthquake in the Tohoku region of Japan. Of course, we have many lost lives, and actually, the scale was as many as 20,000. Many people have lost their lives, and also in Tokyo, actually, we had a magnitude of 5, a little less than 6. Resulted into the lots of conditions and policies of the traffic and operations and in the metropolitan area. Yes, we still have a vivid memory in these regards. Well, of course, and I do represent Mitsubishi Fudosan. Of course, the Nihonbashin is one of the important communities. Actually, we are trying to actually make our contributions to make local cities strong enough. And actually, Nihonbashi Smart City actual project started from that an idea. Actually, TEPCO actually has its initiatives, but besides that, actually, besides the power and the system by the TEPCO, actually, we are now working on this project, actually working on the improved gas systems. Again, through the system, we would like to actually supply the power in case the major the grids actually went down. We should be able to actually provide the same level of power actually under those circumstances. And in the normal days, of course, we can expect to actually reduce the energy consumption, which will result in the less the production of the CO2. So, actually, we're quite happy to be engaged in this quite aggressive project. Again, we have a concept and development activities within Mitsui Fudosan group companies. Actually, we have these traditional ideas and concepts. Also, we would like to actually leverage in the new, because we would like to preserve the good old tradition. At the same time, well, we experienced World War II, and also we had lots of important lives out of the March 11 disaster. Again, out of this the crisis, disasters, we should be able to learn something new. So something old, something new need to be well connected so that we can make better contributions going forward. We're so happy given this opportunity, and we're so happy Mitsui Fudosan was able to actually support and as a special sponsor to behind this the symposium. That said, and again, I am truly grateful for your excellent the contributions and through the presentations and the discussions. Again, we are here to learn a lot of things from your insights. Again, these insights we are gaining here is going to help us to make our contributions to the regenerative urbanism. Yes, I am learning a lot, particularly for the urban development and activities within Mitsui Fudosan. Definitely, it's going to be benefited out of these programs. Thank you indeed. I commit myself to this important journey. Of course, we are having the different time differences again among all these people along the Pan-Pacific regions. But again, we are able to actually overcome such time differences thanks to the modern technologies, thanks to the modern IT technologies. But hopefully, next time, again, in the same place, again, I do hope that we can have same programs face to face in person next time. So I wish, thank you again for your kind participation and attention. Thank you.